Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Information Playground. I'm Ron Bush, and I own Ron Bush Consulting. I'm your host. We've got a great program scheduled for you today. The Information Playground is dedicated really to bringing information to people that probably things you don't know, everything from cybersecurity to legal to political, you name it. We try to cover all that territory. We come to you in a variety of ways. First off, I want to identify WVLP. It's a great community radio station in Valparaiso, Indiana. I started with WVLP years ago, and they really do a lot of good in the community. WVLP is 103.1 if you're in Valpo, and if you're not, stream us. Go to WVLP.org. If you're in town, go to WVLP.org anyway. You'll see what they do in the community, and you can become a part of it through their website. You can also find us on any of the podcast platforms under The Information Playground. The Information Playground comes to you on WVLP from Monday mornings from 8 to 9 and Friday afternoons from 1 to 2. But you can stream us anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and all the rest of them, or you can find us on YouTube under The Information Playground. So welcome. If you're interested in underwriting it, the program on any of those platforms, there's opportunities for you to do so. Check out my website, The Information Playground, ronbushconsulting.com, or you can check out my book on Amazon, Staying Safe in a Very Dangerous World, Think Before You Click. I've got a great guest with us today. He's a gentleman that I've known for a good number of years. And Mark York, welcome to the Information Playground.
Thank you, Ron. It's great to connect and talk to you. Lots of common interests still exist. I see that, definitely.
So Mark, you've done a lot. We haven't touched base. We were getting together, kind of catching up prior to recording. We haven't touched base for a few years, and I'm amazed at all the stuff that's happened since then. You founded a company. I won't take the thunder away. I want you to introduce it, but tell folks what all you do, and I want to I want you to leave off or stop when you get to the newest endeavor. So,
okay, that's the news part, I guess.
Yes.
Right. My name's Mark York, and I'm from Chicago. And I originally had met Ron whenever I used to work in the legal industry quite a bit. Trials, intellectual property, that's where Ron and I developed our common interest. I was involved in a lot of complex white collar review of let's just say bad conduct, individually as well as corporate, plaintiffs and defense, because in that world, at any one time, there are a certain number of bad players. And so I just got a unique sense of looking around, whether it was going into a corporate office and they said, this guy can look at any desk he wants or ask any questions. And that was for the regulatory compliance issues. Whenever there was something not right up in northern Chicago, at Abbott Labs or Baxter, or along those lines, the major players. Not that they were ever targets, but then there was Northrop Grumman defending and key tam whistleblower actions, as well as General Dynamics. I was actually, General Dynamics once was where there was an allegation. James Beggs was the CEO of General Dynamics, and he was resigning, and he took a position as the head of NASA. And this was one of the unique early on views of my life that I saw how things can go awry. And a contract dispute about cross weapons platform billing of the Phalanx gun system, which is the 50 caliber radar suppression system, also onto a radar fire control system for missiles. There was cross billing, and it was authorized, but it was by like a captain from West Point under contract and just a letter or something. So it comes out they were indicted by the DOJ, including James Beggs, and they said, you are not the head of NASA anymore. So he had to resign his position, and they were like, everybody's, they were doing the typical corporate, we didn't do it, but in this case, they knew that it was a fact. And about 7 or 8 months of maybe 40 people looking through thousands of boxes of contract documents, there was just like this letter that was to the engineering division on this project that says, cross billing of the weapons platforms is permitted. It was just like 2 sentences, and everyone, and I saw the letter, and everything was like, oh great, we're done. He never got his job back, and anything else like that, and it just caused stock issues and all the other things. But the funny thing was, and I read this letter directly from James Meese. The letter was, you are no longer a target of the U.S. Department of Justice, Meese.
Wow.
So I realized that, some people play for keeps.
Yeah.
And that was just it. So I was doing things like that. And then, I got away from the law firm world, started consulting. And that's kind of whenever I was involved in some private intellectual property review and some import export work. At one point, I got a ban. I was involved with Sharpie because all the Sharpies that were sold at flea markets, you could see they were, get 10 for $1. I was like, well, that's not Sharpie. And so we ended up going back and forth. It ended up being a total ban. Went through the International Trade Council and everything to DC, and a total ban on the import of any gray barreled color marker in the United States. So those kinds of things. And then I started getting more business development. And that's where we met right about that time, through some common friends there in the Valparaiso, popcorn capital of the world.
Yeah.
And as well as, in Gary. I always wanted to try to help where I could. And I was involved in helping develop a data center in downtown Gary, Indiana. And that was right whenever the medical records, electronic medical records platform was mandated by the federal government. And I said, well, we have this data center we're developing, and that's kind of where that part was going. And then we were developing a data center in downtown Chicago, where I was walking down the street, and it was the last undeveloped block in downtown Chicago, in metropolitan Chicago, across from the Metropolitan Correctional Center, the jail. Right. They could not put anything there. 600 South Clark. And I happened to be on my way to a data center conference at the Westin Hotel. And I said, hey, you know what? I bet we could do it. So there was a tattoo shop there owned by Wayne Cohen and his brother, Randy. And they had a pawn shop. They had a show that was on cable TV for a while even. Mm-hmm. So I went in there and I said, hey, and they owned the whole block. I said, hey, a data center would be great here. And they were like, oh, okay. So I ran over to FedEx, typed up a memorandum of understanding, ran back there, had them sign it. And then I went up to this huge data conference and talked to a few people there. And the next thing you know, about 2 weeks later, we have JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, and they were the people that did HSBC's data centers. United Airlines out in the middle of the cornfields in Illinois. They're the largest data management for data centers in the country. And then some global engineering companies and they all came together. We started putting this together just from that kind of interaction. So I pulled out of that project and I moved to Chicago, from down there to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to be doing next. I had some, basic consulting, and I started getting involved in pharmaceutical litigation consulting and review and reporting. And I became very, very well known for writing about the opioid crisis and how it evolved and some of the bad conduct that went on from the top level down in those areas. And I became very well, I was contacted by Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, and some others about where was I getting my content and intel. And I, of course, would not say anything. And it turned out that I decided to leave the company, and I had developed some other contacts. And I got into some more substantial reporting outside of just like the opioids, some pharmaceutical, chemical transgressions, and there's quite a few of them on the Mass Tort news side, but I'll wait for us to talk more about that. But I just realized that nobody else was reporting on this in a direct and wide open way. And masstortnews.org is right there. And we have a platform, masstortnews.live, legal cast, which we kind of broadcast some of this information out there. And then a whole bunch more, but ask, any questions about.
That's
And I also am down here in Florida fishing whenever I can.
You're a smart man.
Yes.
And you know how to fit it all in. So let's talk about Mass Tort News. That's what I was alluding to, but didn't want to give away until you had a chance to get there. So when did you start that? You kind of covered why. Tell viewers what all that you do on Mass Tort News. Give the website again so they can go out and take a look. I went through it earlier today, and there's just a wealth of information out there. And I encourage all my listeners and viewers to go there and take a look at it. What is it you hope to accomplish through Mass Tort News? When did you do it? Let's get into that kind of stuff. And then let's talk about torts. I was intrigued by one of the articles, the difference between torts, mass tort versus class action. There's a difference that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't been to your website. So I'll quit talking.
Okay.
Let you carry the ball for a while.
All right. As I was writing at the previous company I was affiliated with, great company, no lingering issues there, but I just saw that my writing was getting recognized in ways that was way beyond the capacity of what I was doing there. And I was technically just a consultant who was providing guidance to clients, where my writing and the content and the reach was just going everywhere. It was being reshared and, turned over to other people. So I went to the people that I worked with and I said, hey, we should start something called Mass Tort News, and we should trademark, get it turned into a news source. They were like, oh no, that'll never go. And I was like, all right. So I was basically on slow resignation. I just decided to take it to the next level. But in the interim, I went to the patent trademark office and put in an application to trademark Mass Tort News and things like that. I'm still in the process because there's a few things we have to do to work it out. But I also decided that people wanted to sponsor it, and I said no. I'm going to do this myself on the writing and just have it there for anyone to read it or contribute, and basically start getting the message out. So I started just writing my articles and pushing them out there, and they started getting more and more traction. And I decided to focus. I mean, everybody says, the buzzword is, big pharma is bad and this and that. And, in any major industry, the size of what's going on in our pharmaceutical manufacturing and research world, there are shortcuts, bad players, bad conduct. That just comes with the territory.
Right.
But in some instances, some of the conduct I noticed was not just bad conduct. It was intentionally egregious conduct that should not have been permitted. And there were checks and balances in place in compliance that people were supposed to, even if they anonymously report, there were ways to stop and start things. And I saw that really wasn't occurring because I've got a very strong federal regulatory compliance background and research. So I could look and see and talk to people and understand things. And some of these pharmaceutical litigations turned into major things. And I'm not faulting, any Johnson & Johnson or Abbott or Merck or whatever, but whenever they write a $5 billion check to settle a civil lawsuit for no admittance of liability, they're still selling the same drug. That's just called a cost of doing business. And that's just a unique aspect in the United States that they don't have over in Europe. If your clinical trials and other things don't match what's going on out in the real world, you got to back that drug up quite a bit and start explaining yourself. Here is, once you're in the market, you're going to stay in the market unless the FDA says something. And unfortunately, the FDA and some of our federal regulatory compliance agencies have been complicit in fudging the science and the numbers at times. A good switching over to the EPA, you're familiar with Roundup, Bayer, Roundup. Yes. That is one that I don't have it much there on the site, but I'm very familiar with some of the transgressions. There were instances first Bear's really in a trouble of hurt. Their stock went from like $30 down to 12, and it hasn't gone back up, even though they basically settled for 10 or 12 billion dollars, that Roundup litigation. But they did not do any due diligence whenever they purchased Monsanto to see that there was this big, huge, multi-billion-dollar litigation over Roundup. And it was out there and it was known. So they went back in all these papers and emails, and everything came out in the discovery process. And it showed clearly that there was collusion at the Chemical Council, who are supposed to be, like an oversight, and they provide science and paper and research professors that says, oh yeah, this meets the criteria, this is good, EPA, let's use this. Well, they were actually retaining through a third-party vendor the people that were working on these committees and councils that were definitely saying that there was no bad science with the Roundup. And then the one senior EPA official, he was about number 4, that left, that was really spearheading all this, and it all came out in the papers. He became immediately like a $300,000 a year consultant for Monsanto, like a week after he left. This is all out there. If you look at it, there's a law firm called Baum Hedlund, BAUMHEDLUND. They're out in California, but they were the lead firm. They just Baum Hedlund and Roundup. That's about all you have to look up. They have a repository that would make the Library of Congress like want to have one of those. And it's all about these transgressions. So there are people that are doing and thinking, and I started seeing a lot more of that. I was like, that's what we need to do. So there are issues, and there, the opioid crisis, going back to that. Long ago, I don't know if many people realize how the Sackler family got Purdue and in and out of so many things, but where they learned how to do that marketing, because they are the defined marketing people that started kind of the marketing abuses that became industry standards, which are now seen as almost criminal. And they were indicted twice. But years ago, there was a company called Hoffman LaRoche. Ron, you might be about old enough to remember whenever Valium came out.
I was just thinking that.
Mother's Little Helper. All right, that was just an innocuous, that was just a drug, another drug. And there was these two brothers, Richard Sackler, and I can't remember the other one's name. They had a marketing company. And someone at Hoffman LaRoche said, hey, these guys really got it going on. This is like 1969 or something.
Yeah.
And so in a year and a half, they turned Valium from just nothing to a blockbuster drug by marketing it to the doctors and to everyone else. And they were like, well, that makes sense. That was their test run for OxyContin. So then go ahead.
Not to interrupt you, because this is great. Mother's Little Helper, the Rolling Stones had the song.
Yes.
That's what they're talking about, is that Mother's Little Helper. But I can remember reading, just a few years ago. At the time, I mean, I was too young to care. I was just a kid. But I can remember reading not too long ago how doctors, that's not true. I was at a meeting with a pharmacist who was talking about that. This is where I get the information. A few years ago, doctors would prescribe 50, 100, 120 tablets and just say, just take one a day, just take, there was no control, no concern, because it's not addictive. Everybody says it's not. Unfortunately, people started getting addicted.
Yes.
And they were eating them like candy or taking them like candy. That was a problem for them. Of course, we didn't learn from that, because now you get, and please pick up with OxyContin right where you were. Now you fast forward a couple of decades or a few decades, and here we are. Same thing all over again.
Yeah, that's basically what they did was they started Purdue Frederick, and they had a subsidiary, which is Purdue Pharma LP, and Purdue Frederick's the parent. Purdue Pharma was the subsidiary that was doing OxyContin. They started the marketing, going to doctors, and then, but more importantly, do you ever hear of the pain scale of 1 to 10? that
No.
where if you ever went into a doctor's office or an
Yeah.
emergency room,
Yeah.
what's your pain? 1 to 10?
Sure.
That is purely a Sackler family contrived thing that they pushed out into hospitals and the agendas by they went to each state medical association and got a bunch of pain doctors. They started sponsoring conferences all over that were like Coronado out in off San Diego, the Kiowa Island, South Carolina, Marco Island. These are nice places. They fly these doctors there, and it was all comped. And then they were like, oh, by the way, we have this new drug, and it's not addicting, it's synthetic, because they synthesized the opiate derivative in there. So they said, oh, these are, they're coated and wax, and it takes hours and hours. And then so everybody just bought into it. And the next thing you know, it just turned in. And there's an article in masstortnews.org called Oxy Express, OXY Express, and it details the Sackler efforts and how they did many things. And it's all documented. And the only, it's out somewhat of a common circulation. The only Richard Sackler deposition, there's a link to it in there, and he has to like spill the beans about everything that he was doing. So what they did, and then everybody started seeing that the Sacklers were pulling in $2 or $3 million, and this was not a non-generic. This is a brand drug, and the derivative, the generic version was oxycodone. So everybody started jumping on the opioid bandwagon. They're like, well, they're making so much money, so should we. So everybody just started mass producing and pushing out. And that's where the oversight in the corporate regulatory governance failed. They all had checks and balances that if you went up, and this goes all the way to Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, the pharmacies, who are now the deepest pocket of cash-rich companies in the whole opioid litigation. But whenever there was an increase of more than 15% per quarter for narcotics like opioid or opioid derivatives, you were supposed to report that to the DEA in your state. That literally years went by, and there were like in some instances 500% increases in a year. Like there were some West Virginia pharmacies that were prescribing 2 million pills a year.
Oh my goodness.
And the town had 12,000 people. There's some other articles in there that you could find but things like that were going on, and nobody was reporting it. Their corporate regulatory governance, they have whole staffs of lawyers and techs that saw this, and they just ignored it. And then they were still paying the sales reps hundreds of thousands in bonuses. And this went on everywhere. And people like Johnson & Johnson has been writing checks in the opioid litigation forever. And everyone's like, well, all they make is Tylenol 3. That's just, that's what the dentist used to provide. Yeah. No. Tasmania, in the country of Tasmania, is the opioid poppy fields owned by Johnson & Johnson, who are the raw opium importer into the United States, who were the first fail-safe. This doesn't usually get out there so much, but whenever they noticed that it went from a ton a quarter to 2 years later, it was 10 tons per quarter. That was, odd thing. It was just failure to report. And that's why some of these fraud claims in the opioid litigation, the RICO claims, because it was a contrived, it was like everyone was like, well, I'm not going to say anything if you don't say anything.
Right.
And it just went on and on. And then the pharmacies, as they were filling these prescriptions, they had to know that there's no way that they could have written, 3,000 opioid-based prescriptions in, say, 2001, and by 2006, they were writing 100,000. People didn't get that sick that quick. And these are all well-defined and recognized numbers. Yeah. So those are the kinds of, I really got heavily involved in that. I went to West Virginia, and I got to know some people there. I became good friends with someone. His name was Dr. Raul Gupta. He left not long after that to become the head of March of Dimes chief medical officer. And he was just most recently the President Biden's transition team lead for ONDCP, which is the Office of National Drug Control Policy. the drug czars branch. And Raul and I had cooperated and collaborated extensively since he had left as Commissioner of Health of West Virginia on opioid abatement protocols and planning around the country. And I'm not saying I'm, Robin Hood, right? But I was funding all this myself while I was actually doing my other consulting job. And there was no income coming in. We were just doing it because no one else was.
Yeah.
And I was able to write about all these things as well in other areas. And then things naturally started, progressing, and, one thing led to another. And theoretically, I don't know if Raul's going to like this or not, but he is theoretically going to be probably nominated as President Biden's next drug czar.
Great.
So his office is going to be at the White House. He's going to have basically a cabinet position. And, I just watched all this come up, but there is a tragic need for someone of his skill set right now. And I don't want to get into that because that's kind of a certain area, but those are the types of things that I saw as I was doing this writing and reviewing, and I became friends with some of the attorneys as well as some of the governmental entities, the National Governors Association. I interact with them because they know if they ask me a question, I'm going to tell them the truth.
Mhm.
I once was invited by the Senate Majority Leader, and I spent 7 months in extreme rural West Virginia, and they refer to it as the Free State of McDowell County because it's out there in the middle of nowhere, coal mining country, nothing left there really, but it was ground zero for the opioid crisis. And we tried to get treatment services there. We had Volunteers of America willing to open up a pregnant women's, high-risk women's facility. And we couldn't get the clinical help, the doctors, licensed medical professionals. Like, we are not driving over those mountains to get to this little area. And that made me just like see that, America was having issues close to home, and it just wasn't that pretty of a picture. So we went back to Charleston, West Virginia, and I, talked to some of the people there, and I told them, I was like, hey, there's some really embedded problems here. And like, oh yeah, we know. It's like, well, that's not helping by saying we know about it. You're supposed to be fixing it. So the Senate Majority Leader there, I won't say what his name is, he arranged for me to speak on the last day of he was the head of a committee of a joint Senate House Healthcare Committee to go in and speak to these guys. And I had along with me, there was Blades Williamson, who was the founder of the U.S. Amy Winehouse Foundation, the Addiction Center. Mm-hmm. And he was this Brit guy that was a former, and he went over well in West Virginia, let me tell you. So we go in there, and what I refer to in West Virginia sometimes, it's not the Hatfields and the McCoys, because there's a lot of that craziness still going on. But there's two universities there that fight cats and dogs over everything. And I'm being very straightforward about this. Uh-huh. And because they are the powerhouses in the state outside of the chemical industry and others. But so I go in there and give my speech, and I say, look, I don't care who you have here, professors, senators, representatives, your treatment models are failed. Your Hatfields over there, McCoy's over there, referring to the schools. Mm-hmm. Said, you're fighting over everything. I said, why? You're monetizing things that someone in a metropolitan area or a more refined area is more highly valued for treatment and other services, mental health services, than someone that's over the mountain and around the hill that doesn't even, if they go a half mile outside of the center of town, there's no cell service at all. So there's things like that. And people started, and we had numbers and we were giving it back to them. And then, but the funny thing was, within 10 minutes of that stopping, I had gone to the washroom. I come back out. There was this taller guy who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services for the state. Someone had hot-legged him over from his office and said, you need to talk to these guys. So that was the kind of straight shooting weight, but by just telling them blatantly. So that turned into, there's some good things going. There always was, but it just got it kind of more talking back and forth. And Dr. Gupta, who's gone by that time, he is trying to, shine some light there. So those are some of the more positive things that came out of just started with the writing on the opioid crisis and then doing the research.
Great. What a great story. We've got a break in a minute, but before we do, I want to I better ask you when we come back. I want to ask where things are now. You know, it kind of blew up under the Obama administration. Trump said he'd fixed it, I guess. I'm not sure what he said about it, but I'd like to know where it is now. So let's
Yes,
deal with that when we come back.
sure,
I didn't know
absolutely.
we were going to go this far into the opioid. Fascinating. I didn't know hardly any of this stuff you're telling me. So, and I thought I was fairly informed. You know, I watched 60 Minutes and the
Oh, they
you know, you don't know what you don't know. So,
exactly.
folks, you are listening to the Information Playground, and I want to thank you for joining us today. If you're catching us on WVLP, I hope that you go to their website, wvlp.org. You can underwrite this program or any of their other fine programs. If you're looking for us there, you can catch us Monday mornings from 8 to 9, Friday afternoons from 1 to 2. WVLP.org is a great website. WVLP is a great community radio station. They do a lot in the community, and they can use your help right now. Pandemic's hard on everybody, including not-for-profit radio stations, and that's what it is. It's a community radio station. If you'd like to catch us on demand, you can catch us on any of the platforms, the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, all the rest of them. Or you can catch us on YouTube. And you're welcome to underwrite either one of those platforms as well. It's the Information Playground. Apparently, Information Playground's a fairly popular name. You got to get all three words on there. Look for the one that has Ron Bush on it. I own Ron Bush Consulting. We're a cybersecurity company. Check out our website, ronbushconsulting.com. We have with us today Mark York, and we're talking about Mass Tort News. Mark, give them the website to look up again. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Okay. Mass Tort News, MASSTORTNEWS.org is the domain, the site with the news media. And mark@masstortnews.org is my email, and I respond always.
Quickly. I love it. Keeping it simple. I love that. So,
yes.
So let's pick up again. I'm just amazed. I've wondered what happened to it. You pushed a button when you talked about the pain scale. Had no idea all that history. It used to bother me when I would go to the doctor and they would do that very thing. I've had back pain for decades. And so every time I would go in, he would ask me where it is on that scale. And you know, it's back pain. What do you mean I'm not supposed to have any pain? Because that's what would follow. We can do this and you won't have that issue. Well, I don't want to take a pill and get rid of something, because I know once I go down that road, I'm going to have to keep taking that pill.
Yes.
Because it's not going to cure it. And so I never went down that road, but it always bothered me when they would talk about that. So let's go back to where we're at. I haven't heard anything about it with the pandemic. That's all you can hear about. That, and you know, all the trouble that the previous administration got itself into. That's all just monopolizes the news, and it's you can't hardly get anything else.
Well, this actually, I have a historical story that correlates to what just ended with some of the lawsuits from the Trump administration, et cetera, and his lead counsel on that. Back in 2005, a criminal indictment was issued. Department of Justice criminally indicted Purdue Pharma, and they were charged with like numerous felonies and everything. And it was going not good for them, including the Sackler family, the executives. They were also on the hook. So who comes to the rescue? But just recently departed U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani. He was hired back in 2006 by the Sacklers. This is in Bush, if you remember. And the next thing you know, he's pulling the full court press, and you know, peer to peer, he was able to do things. And so it comes down to it, everything kind of goes away. And Purdue, and this is where it gets unique. At one time, he was a smart lawyer, because Purdue Pharma, if they would have pled guilty, they could have never written a Medicaid, Medicare prescription again. That would have just destroyed them. So Papa Purdue Frederick Company takes the plea, takes one for the team, writes a $670 million check, and then two executives from the company plead guilty to, I think it was off-label marketing or some weird thing, and they got probation.
Mhm.
And next thing you know, that was in 2006 and 7. OxyContin and Purdue Pharma were back to the races and selling. And that's whenever the opioid crisis got really bad, was 2010 up into like 2014. And so that retroactively, that's kind of the things that were going on. There could have been a hard stop to a lot of it, because the other companies would, once they saw one of them got it and their executives, that would have sent a signal to the border, the boardrooms around the country, like, all right, let's just pretend we never did this and go do something else. It didn't occur. And so we end up where we are now with, there's the residual legacy of the opioid addiction, and there was no real effort to confront it on a global scale. And unfortunately, fortunately, it was looked upon right whenever Trump's administration started. He started the Opioid Commission. He had Chris Christie on it, and Raul Gupta was a part of that in a peripheral way. But the head of that commission was Kellyanne Conway, who is not well suited for anything along those lines.
Right.
Might have been attractive in a way, she might have been a lawyer in a way, but she wasn't an addiction specialist or anything else. So that never got any legs, and they got zero funding. I don't know. I think they just had coffee and crumpets or something at certain times, to be blatant, but it never got any legs, and it never provided any guidance. And that is, I deal with a large quasi-governmental agency that is involved in all 50 states. And they said that the most horrific issue right now in their ability to do things is the lack of federal guidance in the previous 4 years on what to do and how to do it. There was money thrown through SAMHSA and the DEA, through agencies where they had grant money, but that meant there were 50 different states doing 50 different things. Within those 50 different states were, 40 to 60 counties, each doing things, so there was no real guidance the way it was needed. And that's what they're trying to fix now. But also, whenever going back to March 21st, or whenever the lockdown was last year, which is close to a year, the addiction issues just ramped up, and more importantly, all the adverse events that go along with it, the mental health, the lack of work, and all the other things, because people lost their jobs. I mean, you can only especially if you had a history of addiction or addictive behaviors, that caused those to just accelerate, and so many more people. And people, for a long, and one of the bad things about in the opioid crisis, I can tell you that Crown Point, over there, Lake County, Indiana, they sure did not report all of the opioid overdose as opioid overdose whenever it was first starting. And neither did a lot of the other counties all over the country, because it wasn't fashionable. It was like, oh my God, we don't want everyone to know that all these people are dying from overdose. And do you remember whenever they needed the refrigerated trucks?
Yeah.
For morgues and things? That's how bad it got. That's now occurring. It has been for about the last 4 months. It's COVID as well as addiction and other things, because they're all just intertwined, but no one is separating them out. But they do know that in Florida, apparently, there was like a 63% increase of overdose deaths from the year before during COVID. So that's a huge number, and that's here, and they're pretty data centric here to a degree. But in some other areas where, West Appalachia and others, where they don't have the modern tech and ability to track those things, it was just like, oh, it's COVID death or whatever it was. But there were a lot of heart attacks that were they were classified as heart attacks or whatever it was that weren't. And then also the other, and I don't want to sound like a political hack or anything like that, but fentanyl, the people that were making the heroin, they found out that you could buy a 55-gallon drum of pure fentanyl from China for probably $800.
Yeah.
And that held, 250 pounds, which would have equated to, 1,000 pounds of heroin, pure heroin.
Yeah.
And so, and that also contributed where people couldn't afford the pills anymore. And then the heroin, they were getting heroin, and even that was going away. Then the fentanyl picture really exploded. And now they have no clue about anything that's going on because the data, the inability because of COVID to track things correctly and do the testing, because you had so many other catastrophic events in the healthcare world that they were like, well, we can't afford to go take these comprehensive tests on someone that may have died from a fentanyl overdose because it just wasn't prioritized at the time. So that's a whole other, so the data is skewed right now about the actual numbers. People, there are people that are trying to figure it out, but there's just a backlog of everything. The local Department of Health, they're just overwhelmed in what they can do, you know, and the hospitals are. I mean, I'm not sure there's some pretty good hospitals there in Northwest Indiana and Chicago, but you know, in some areas they don't have their, you know, that many facilities. So they're just stretched very, very thin. And I've talked to people in DC, and that is one of the major issues that we're going to have to get wrapped around is, you know, the mental health primarily for the families and everything else, which is what's pretty much needed at this point.
Yeah. You know, thinking back to those times and going back to Northwest Indiana, I can remember early 2000s going to chamber meetings, and I was in Rotary, going to Rotary meetings, and we'd have speakers come in, and they were talking about Valparaiso being like the heroin capital of the country. Heroin, Valparaiso, come on, you can't be right. And yet they had all these numbers and supporting evidence to support it. And then I started reading about all the meth places, you know, farms.
Yes.
Which
Oh
you
yeah,
thought were
the Kankakee Valley along the river was well known for meth. Yeah.
You know, I walk away from listening to this. This is small town Indiana. This is where I thought, you know, it's the last bastion of American fidelity or something. I don't know what to say, but here, you know, they're walking around stoned, I guess. Not everybody,
Yeah.
of course. I don't mean that, but there's a drug problem there, and I never would have known that if all of this stuff hadn't started happening. It seemed like all at the same time.
Yes.
I wonder, I mean, they're still stopping fentanyl coming in from all the borders. It's still being shipped over from China. All the stuff you just mentioned.
In India as well. India, yes. Money, because it's money and it's just so compact.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, just it's pretty easy to, you know, conceal. It's a whole, it needs, one thing that President Biden has designated, and anybody could just look up Joe Biden, $120 billion addiction. That's how much he has stated he's going to dedicate.
Is that in that new bill that Congress is arguing about, the 1.9 trillion?
I don't think it's in that. This is something this is a very specific $120 billion for addiction services and treatment and abatement planning that's going to be global. And that's actually outside. There's still the proposed theoretical $50 billion settlement coming out of the opioid litigation. You know, that's everywhere. Yeah. And here's something most people don't even know about. You remember I mentioned the Purdue Pharma criminal indictment back in the day? About 9 months ago, Walmart was going to be criminally indicted. They were like 3 days from the paper being filed. I mean, right there. And the call was made right to the White House, and Barr was brought in, and he troubleshot it. And look in the media, you could find it. It's out there somewhere. The Walmart criminal indictment was suppressed. I mean, it was going into, you know, indictments to be issued like 3 days away, and it was stopped. Now, no one knows, and I'm not trying to cast light bad on there. I think the way it went about was wrong. The way it was suppressed like that through personal contacts, you know, someone called someone. Right. But I think that there may be a renewed look at what was not looked at so much, even under Biden, under Obama and Biden and Trump, is some of the criminal conduct. because the judge in the multi-district litigation, he made it so very clear because they wanted to get rid of the RICO claims. And the judge said, no, those are staying. So that was right there at the start. And that, if the judge says the RICO, the reason they threw those in more than anything was because of, that's triple damages if you win, if you want to try to get them, but that's getting into the weeds a little. But so there may be some renewed look at that. There was a company called Subsys, I believe, no, Insys, INSYS. They developed a fentanyl spray. First they had, did you ever see the little Listerine, like little slivers you put under your tongue and you get Listerine? Right. Well, they were fentanyl. They were like little fentanyl tabs, but they were for stage 4 cancer. And then they had a Subsys spray. Insys Therapeutics, INSYS is the company. Well, their CEO, he's a billionaire in Arizona. He lived right there until he went to jail last year. And all of their executive team, they got caught. They were blatantly manipulating the insurance. They were saying, oh yeah, the person got stage 4 cancer and they had back pain, but they were killing people. I mean, people were dying because they were getting some kind of spray, in your nose, and that's like fentanyl up your. So they got caught. And I mean, there's indictment. I have a whole library of all that stuff I could share with you if you want to take a look at it. But John Kapoor, the chairman of the board, the founder of the company, billionaire, was living in Arizona. They all got indicted, went through trials, and they are all in jail, prison now. But that was an example of where there were select criminal indictments, but they're saying that now there's over 700,000 people died from overdoses, from pills. Pills are, the things like the fentanyl medication. So that's a huge number. So they don't know if the Biden administration is going to start looking at those the criminal conduct. I imagine everyone's just going to write big checks. You saw McKinsey very recently. They wrote a $600 million check. Did you see that part? That was just for Purdue Pharma. That came right out of the clear blue sky because Purdue Pharma, they got out of the opioid litigation by saying, we're going to file structured bankruptcy. We're going to give you all of our money. Please don't indict us. And so they went into bankruptcy court, which is much more liberal in certain ways. If you have money, it's like, it's a pass through. So, but the Sackler family held out their $3 billion. They're like, we're going to put this in at the end, but we want to make sure that everything's okay. Yeah. So $3 billion is still a lot of money. And then as part of the review that all the creditors committees were doing, they kept seeing McKinsey. So they were in the back office supporting everything that the Sacklers were pushing from a outside advisory panel, and they just knew they were caught. They were just like, all right, we'll give you 600. So the federal government said, we want $600 million. And just 10 days ago, they wrote him a check. The bad thing is that was like an admittance of liability. Guess who's being added to every municipal complaint in the United States? McKinsey. Good. For all the other litigation dockets. So all they did was just, I don't know if you could have done a secret check writing thing, but now they're right in the middle of it, and they're the newest deep pocket.
I'm beginning to wonder why we have a deficit if we just collect money from all these big companies.
They write the checks. I mean, the average new blockbuster drug is $5 billion a year, and it lasts for 7 years. And the big companies have 4 or 5 of those at any one time. That's a lot of money. Yeah. And the development of it may have been 400 million. I mean, they have big machines and labor and everything to support, but it's very profitable.
The thing that bothers me the most of all of this is people die through all of this.
Yeah.
Loved ones. I caught a little bit of Biden's speech at Pfizer today, and it was very well delivered, a lot of emotion, and I can feel that with this. How many people are sitting at home and in a chair that used to be occupied by your mother or your sister, or your brother or father or child. How many of those are empty now simply because drug companies had to make zillions of dollars
Yes.
and nobody wanted to catch anything? One of the things I like about your website is you tag things where you can actually go see the
Oh yeah,
actual documents. I mean, I love that because I mean, we've all been surrounded with stuff, people making all kinds of claims and something and stuff, but you actually give us a link to go look at the actual document, to actually go through it. I haven't had time to do that, but my intention is to,
yeah.
especially
Well,
on the opioids. I wasn't thinking about that as much as I was the PFAS and water. You got something on there on that? Oh my gosh.
Well, I can tell you one thing that is tragically going to be affecting America for a long time yet about the opioids, which no one has not been brought to the forefront. And Dr. Gupta, my friend, who is the head, chief medical officer at March of Dimes, that's about infants and medical issues, basically infants, mothers, and things. But there's a thing called NAS babies, neonatal abstinence syndrome babies. And those were kids that their mothers were addicted or taking opioids, whether it was heroin, fentanyl, pills, whatever, during pregnancy. And those are a lot of latent, really bad congenital issues, both mental, physical, and others. But an example is about 4% of the babies over a 12-year period in West Virginia, like Kentucky, and parts of Tennessee were NAS babies. Now you multiply that over X number of years, 4% every year, that's hundreds of thousands of kids.
Yeah.
And then you multiply it around the country because the addiction cycle was a lot more prevalent than people knew. There's another 1.2% of all births, all of them. And these numbers are going to be coming out very soon. So you figure that, and this started in about, let's just say 2000. Let's get rid of the early years of Purdue. Let's just start at 2000. That means kids born then, so those numbers were consistent. They really are defined and accurate from about 2007 to about 2015. All those kids, look at where they're at. Those kids have been classified as ADHD, or he's just wild or something like that. Those kids are coming into the workplace or not in the workplace. They've been considered trouble kids because no one understood what the real unique issues were with them. And now they're going to be coming into the criminal justice system, and they're just going to be bad actors. That's how they're going to be classified. So that's a whole underlying thing that's in education, workplace, criminal justice that nobody likes to talk about.
And it will be with us for the foreseeable future.
Oh yeah, it's going to, well, these people are going to be growing up forever, until something, yeah. And that's just something that really needs to be addressed because unfortunately, I'm not, for whatever purposes, a mother may have become addicted for whatever while she was pregnant, intentionally or unintentionally. But whenever that kid gets to age 4 or 5 and they go to preschool, they're not going to say, oh, by the way, I was an addicted mother and it's an NAS baby. And someone may have known how to, they're just like, oh no, he's just high strung. They say he's hyperactive. That's just not right. Because then they're like, oh, here, take a Ritalin. The kid's already got an inclination to have addictive conduct because of the legacy. And then here, if you go give them something else that could theoretically cause other issues, things just, the viewpoint mentally just is not there. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
We need to delve further into this. I'm thinking as you're saying that, my first thought was, and I thought cybercrime was depressing. Now I've got a whole nother area to look at.
Well, we could get Dr. Gupta, we could get Raul Gupta on here with me.
That would be great.
Your convenience. Yeah.
Great. But I was thinking, as you talk about addiction, we live in an addictive society. Addiction, I was actually just writing something on this the other night. I haven't finished it for a different publication, but addiction is one of those things, you can be addicted to just about everything. I think of
see this?
Yeah. Addiction to that.
Wait a minute, I have 2 of them.
Well, we'll talk about that offline. No, but I mean, really addicted to television, addicted to porn, addicted to all kinds of chemicals and different things, addicted to, shopping. There's just seems to be no end of it. And while some of it may sound, I don't know, ridiculous. it's really a very serious problem. And maybe all that you've just talked about, maybe that's one of the reasons why we're there. Now, part of it is as a society, we accept it.
Mhm.
If all you're listening to are certain programming on television and movies, I think about when I see commercials, some people just sit and watch that, they binge on that stuff. It's called binge watching all
Mhm.
day long.
Yes.
Can you imagine somebody that's, Friday the 13th, that's what they watch all day long? I hope none of my next door neighbors do that. I don't want to be around them folks.
Yes.
It just, then you bring the internet into it. And
Yes.
you've got people that now can remain anonymous.
Mhm.
So they're addicted to stalking. They're addicted to, what was the book that was a hit a few years ago, 50 Shades of Gray.
Yes.
What we used to never even discuss,
Yes.
sadomasochism, it's a bestseller. I think it's given the Bible a run for its money as far as number of books sold.
Oh, it's the internet. We are a reactive society, more so in the United States than anywhere else, because all you see are Samsung iPhone commercials, and they're sexy, and and the pictures. We have instant gratification, and also anyone that needs to self-diagnose, I refer to him as Dr. Google A.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Google A. I checked it. It says that I've got this. And I look at something, I'm like, what do you say? They're like, I Googled it.
Yeah.
People are totally serious. But also it's like what it's done, it's conditioned people to, instead of reading a book like Dracula, just say Dracula, which is long, they'll do the Wikipedia version of it and read the
Yeah.
last paragraph or the little summary.
Yeah.
And that's just the way we are, like that immediate response, and we're on to the next thing. And children, kids are given a full phone at like 6 or 7. I see people pushing their kids down the street, and kids can't be more than 5 or 6. They may be playing with the phone, but pretty soon, whenever they get, like, their parents will program a game in there for them.
Yeah.
And I was never much of a video game person. I like pinball, but the video game things, I mean, I've watched guys that are, 20 to 40 play video games for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
They'll get up to use the washroom. And but that's just how we are.
It is. And honestly, I think we could do 3 or 4 more hours, especially in the direction we're headed now. I'm going to have to call it to a halt. I want to thank you for being on today. Just
Sure. Thank you.
challenging information, but information we need to be challenged with, and we need to deal with. We've got serious issues that most of us don't know about. And thank you for that. Thank you for starting Mass Tort News. I'm going to be out there a lot.
We need the net. We could do another one of these, and we can talk about PFAS.
And let's
that'll make people's ears curl.
Yeah, I got left as straight, but I think you're right.
If you, I don't know if you read that article yet, but if you read it, they don't call it the forever chemical for nothing.
That's right.
Yeah. So
I didn't get through the whole article, but I got through enough of it that.
It's just one of those things. It's here. It's good to know about it. I mean, but we could talk about that, and I'd be more than happy. I'll be talking to Dr. Gupta later tonight, so we can.
That sounds great.
Okay. Yeah, and he is very, very informative about COVID-19 and the current everything that's going on out here in the world these days. Actually, when he was a young doctor in New Delhi, he was one of the precursors that instituted the polio vaccine program, which resulted in the eradication of polio in New Delhi 12 years later.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so he understands the dynamics of, and they did, in one day, they did 2 million people once, in one day. Yeah.
Wow, we need his expertise now.
Yes, well, everybody has got their, that's a whole.
Yeah. All right, I'm running out of time for the radio station, so let me thank you again, Mark. I'm so grateful you're on today's program. Folks, you've been listening to the Information Playground. If you're watching us on YouTube, you've been watching Mark York. You can find him at masstortnews.org. one word, MASSTORTNEWS. I'm Ron Bush, ronbushconsulting.com. You can email Mark at masstortnews.org or Ron at ronbushconsulting.com. I hope you have a great day. Think about all this stuff and think about how you can help, how you can be a part of the solution. Thank you for being with us. And I look forward to seeing you the next time.